What if I told you that there was an event where talented ROM hack and Fangame developers came together to make some truly interesting games? An event where the sky's the limit, and we as players get to see some pretty unique takes on the Pokemon IP. This is the EV Expo Game Jam, and it's exactly that. While there is a lot to cover, I'll be picking 4 games that stood out to me the most. But before we begin, if you want to see more Pokemon fan game and ROM hack recommendations, then I hope you'll subscribe, as I got a whole lot of good ones covered on my channel, and more to come in the future. But without further ado, let's get right into the games. So the first game on this list will admittedly be the shortest, but that doesn't stop it from being fun. It's called Tower of Ashes, and in this game, you awaken on a mysterious island that's home to not much more than just a tower. You're given the choice between 5 random Pokemon and a goal of reaching the top. The tower is made up of 4 main sections, each one being filled to the brim with powerful wild Pokemon, ready to take you down. Of course, you can capture them, but your resources are limited, so you'll want to make every Pokeball throw a worthwhile one. Along with wild Pokemon, you'll find over 60 different relics lying about. These are items that will provide buffs to your entire team, if they fit what the relic provides. But if you happen to wipe out, you'll be sent back to the outside, with your items, relics, and Pokemon completely gone. However, if you haven't noticed by now, the floors of the tower are actually procedurally generated, meaning each run will feel different and unique. But in order to actually clear a floor, you'll have to defeat a powerful boss Pokemon. A bit of advice if you're going to play this game, don't expect to beat the first boss on your first try. It took me about 4 runs before I actually cleared it myself. Finally, if you're worried that each lost run will feel like a waste of time, you do actually get to keep one thing whenever you wipe, and those are Ash Fragments. These can be used to purchase permanent upgrades to improve your chances of success. This game was a very unique attempt at a Pokemon roguelite, and overall a good way to pass the time if you just want to play some Pokemon without jumping into a full game. I've been a fan of the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series for over a decade, and while I've been disappointed at the fact that we haven't seen a new installment in 3 generations of Pokemon, I am quite pleased with how well the ROM hacking and fangame scene has treated the series. But this game in particular takes the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon universe and puts a very interesting spin on it. Of course, you get the personality quiz and human transformed into Pokemon with no memory plot point that you're used to, but rather than waking up in a vibrant and beautiful new world, you instead find yourself in a harsh and treacherous desert. Now don't get me wrong, the overworld is still very pleasing to look at, but there definitely is a lot of effort made to really emphasize the tough living conditions of the setting. And that's just the beginning. While this game is based off Mystery Dungeon, there are a lot of sizable, but of course welcoming, differences. First of all, dungeons are no longer randomly generated. Instead, you'll traverse through homemade maps that perfectly reflect the nature of your surroundings. Secondly, the battles don't take place in the overworld. Instead, you'll fight it out like you would in a normal Pokemon game. You will, however, still be able to use the unique Mystery Dungeon items, like seeds and other throwables. As for the story, it is very charming. The amount of love that went into each major and even minor character is clearly evident. You definitely won't get bored of reading the dialogue. In fact, you'll probably be wishing for more by the time the game is over. Finally, I want to mention that this game was made using PSDK, an engine similar to Pokemon Essentials, which is what most fan games are normally built with. But as a developer and a player who is very used to Essentials, PSDK just felt so much smoother, and I'm honestly really excited for its future. Anyways, this game is called A Star in the Desert, and I really hope you do end up checking it out. Now, I'll admit, I'm personally not a big fan of the Game Boy Color Pokemon games. I always found them to be super clunky, and the music style didn't treat my ears well. But thankfully, this game actually isn't built on the GBC, it just looks like it. This is Pokemon Berserk, a seemingly ordinary Pokemon game decorated in the Generation 2 style. But this game comes with a few gimmicks, the main one being something called the Awakening phenomenon. It allows you to increase the stats of a single Pokemon in battle, and your role is to be one of the few people testing it. This might sound like an immediate advantage over every other opponent, but it does come with a few quirks, and you'll start to know what I mean once you use it on an evolved Pokemon. While the rest of the game felt pretty standard,
I want to point out some of the other efforts made. There are Fangame starters, and a few regionals, or I guess convergent forms, that all had nice sprites and were fun to use. The Pokemon variety was also very well done. Nothing felt out of place, and I didn't feel overwhelmed by an obnoxious amount of encounters. I was able to build a decent team that I was actually fond of before the first gym, rather than just a team of Pokemon I needed. But I do want to compliment this game's ability to adapt the Gen 2 style in a way that didn't feel clunky. All the newer Pokemon had really nice sprite work, and all the new moves had very satisfying animations. The towns and routes had remixes of familiar Pokemon music, but in a more retro style. Overall, I'm really glad I got to enjoy the retro feeling of Pokemon, and I really hope you give this game a try for yourself.
So at first glance, I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, wait, isn't this just Kanto? But maybe there's Radical Red-esque features, or regional forms? Nope. In this game, we're traveling through the good old Kanto region, but instead of battling each other with Pokemon, we're playing cards. Now I know what you're gonna say. Cards? That sounds boring. To some people, maybe. And as a disliker of card games myself, I would almost agree with you. But in Pokemon Triad Master, the card game in particular is pretty easy to learn. And other than a few extra gimmicks like tight matchups and terrain, it mostly just involves claiming your opponent's card by hitting the corner of theirs with a higher number. But I do hope that out of all of these games, I did give you at least one good recommendation, and if I didn't, then don't worry, as I'm going to be leaving a link in the description to a list of more unique Pokemon games. Anyways, I do hope you have a nice rest of your day, and goodbye!